Welcome to Babylon Brews, deep thoughts fermented over time and text. I come to you, Aaron Crew Juice Maverga with my co-host Gumby.
Hey, what's going on?
And Dr. Michael Heiser.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Actually, it's our honor. We love having you on.
Yep. Well, here we are. Here we are to frighten people and maybe educate a few.
That's right. We'll be, wow, that was scary. While we talk, we'll be sipping on Murphys. Murphys is an internationally recognized Irish stout, brewed since 1856 in the iconic Ladies' Well Brewery, Cork. Classified as an Irish dry stout, Murphys is dark in color and medium-bodied. It is silky smooth with toffee and coffee undertones, almost no bitterness, and an irresistible creamy finish. It has an ABV of 4.0.
You can see the coffee coming out when you pour it. That's awesome.
That's one of my favorites to do is coffees because
is this a paid endorsement? Like,
yeah,
we're working towards that still.
Okay.
We have had some collaborations, which has been nice.
Oh, that's
Paid would be even better.
Paid would be better.
But collaborations work out well.
The most we probably got is free beer offers right now from breweries.
Yeah.
So
okay. Well, they're looking at it as advertising, so
Yes.
we'll take it.
yeah.
Right?
If it does well, you can charge them next time. You know.
Right. Right. So it's been a while though. Your life has been chock full of changes.
Yeah. It's been. I was trying to think about this the other day. Like, when was I? It's got to be 2 years. I mean, it's a while. So I can't quite remember when, but I mean, yeah, the big thing is we moved. I'm in Florida now, but that was a big deal because it also involved leaving Faith Life Logos, for this new position. So I've had a position change, a job change, which has really, I mean, there were lots of reasons that it was pretty apparent that I would be an idiot to not go. So it wasn't that much of a dilemma. My wife and I, we had actually been thinking about moving before we ever even heard of the place we're at now. Because basically what I did at Faith Life for the last 3 years I was there was right. I wrote books. Every once in a while I'd pop into the studio and do a mobile ed course or a commercial for something or, whatever it was, a little sit down chit chat. So, we're thinking, good grief, we can do that anywhere. And so we have a daughter who lives in North Carolina, and we were thinking about going to North Carolina. And then, that was sort of rolled around in our heads for 6 months, and then this thing came up. So it was like we were sort of mentally already down that road. It just changed. It was still East Coast. It actually is a shorter trip to drive from where we're at now to visit her than it was to fly from the Northwest. Because
Wow.
when we lived in the Northwest, there was just a regional airport. It literally took a day to go anywhere. If you pass the center of the country, you're looking at a day.
Wow.
Because the layovers and stuff. So, West Coast was fine, into Dallas. But if you're going anywhere east of that, it's a day. So
Yeah.
It works out a lot better. Well, we're glad we did,
Well, you were one of the pioneers behind mobile ed, right?
Yeah. I was one of the three people in on the ground floor of that. It actually, when it came to doing anything for the company on video, it was me and another guy. And then we had the guy who, it's hard to even call it a video department at that point. It was like a guy with a camera. But we actually really didn't even have the camera. When we first made the first thing they did in video was learn to use Greek and Hebrew, the first iteration. And it took us, the only reason it got done was the VP of the company, whose son was Bob Pritchett, the CEO at Logos. The VP had this passion to do something educationally in video. And we all thought that the language tools were, where to go, because that's where, I mean, it's going to sound awful, but that's where most of the guilt is. People people either want to know, want to feel like they can handle the languages, or they went to seminary, and even if they did well, that was 20 years ago, and they've not looked at it since. They feel lost, still. And so we knew that. But it took us months to convince Bob, the CEO, to let us do that course, because Bob he doesn't have any degrees. He actually left high school to go work at Microsoft. This is just when Windows was coming out. And out of that whole experience was the birth of Logos. He started the company. Then, he was the kid writing code in his bedroom, in high school, like in the movies, and he had Microsoft developers as his clients as a teenager. I mean, it was one of those rare circumstances, but he's entirely self-taught. So he has a very low view of anything formal education. So it took a long time for us to convince him to do this. And he gave us 1 month, and I think it was $10,000. We didn't even have any equipment. It was ridiculous, So we went to Best Buy and got a handheld video camera. We had to put the stuff that isn't screen capture in the first version of Learn to Use. We had lines, and so we recorded them in an iPhone, and then we put a thing in our ear, and we talked over ourselves into the camera. We didn't even have a teleprompter or the ability to do PowerPoint. It was just like the ultimate low budget thing.
Wow.
And Bob made fun of it every chance he got. So it shipped, and the day it crossed 700,000 in sales, which was only a few months later, he called a meeting, and he comes into the room and he says, "I promise I will not make fun of this product anymore."
Let's get a bigger office.
Right. When can we do more of this? Why don't we have more of these? And I'm there. I didn't actually have a mirror, but I said, "Bob, look in the mirror. There's your answer right there." So that's how the whole thing was born. The success of that first thing, which wasn't visually good at all. I mean, it was good enough to ship, but it wasn't like, wow, this is cool looking. No one would ever describe it like that.
Right.
But out of that came mobile ed. And so here we are 150, courses later, with lots of scholars from all over the country. And that was an interesting experience too, with some of them. But so that was one of those ground floor things that, we were fortunate enough to be a part of.
That's awesome. And I love getting the material, because I'm actually still a Faith Life Now subscriber. So it's fun.
There you go. There's a lot on there,
Yeah,
it really is, So I think they still have something of an awareness raising problem yet. I don't think they really tapped, all the audience that they could, but it'll get there. But it's a successful thing, just across the board. Now it's a whole department, and I'm detached from it now. But yeah, in the old days, it was kind of ridiculous to start.
Well, you've had a lot of cool things come out since the last time we talked to you.
Yeah, it was probably Angels came out, Demons, of course, just came out. The Stranger Things book would be one of those.
Right.
Trying to think if there's anything else. The Enoch commentary.
I was going to say the Reversing Herman.
Yeah, Reversing Herman. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot that's come out. So pick your poison,
Yeah.
Whatever you want to talk about.
Which one was your favorite to work on?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably the Stranger Things book. That was the most fun. And it wasn't my idea. I had just handed in Angels a few months prior to that, and the guy who runs Lexham, shot me an email and said, "Hey, we have this idea in a meeting about." And I had just done self-published What Does God Want? This little book for new believers, you know. And as soon as I heard the idea, I thought, because I love the show, you know, I was predisposed out of the gate, you know, to do this. But I thought, you know, I know exactly what I'm doing with this. And literally my process was, I watched every episode. I mean, essentially got paid to watch Stranger Things 3 or 4 times, you know, every episode. Take copious notes, you know, on all the episodes. But my method was, I'm going to take the first section of What Does God Want, which is just reducing the supernatural storyline to, you know, a couple chapters, all right? Just tell the story. And I'm going to map that to the show. And it was easy. It was easy. Because, you know, the good storytelling will map to good storytelling. It has all the archetypes in there. It's got, you know, major themes of the biblical story, and 11 is an obvious Christ figure. But what was really appealing to me is that I think there's only one place in the show where you could point to it and say, that might be an intentional Christian allusion. And are you guys familiar with the show?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's at the end of season 1 where Hopper puts the Eggos into that box. You know, that box is the, I mean, you can look it up on the internet and you get pictures. It's a Catholic communion box, you know, a certain style, but it is the box. Yeah. And so there are a lot of people, you know, who thought that this was a pretty direct, you know, allusion, because the wafer's round and, you know, all this kind of stuff, that whole scene. But other than that, what I was really struck by is how the show, without even the writers and the directors knowing it, mimicked the biblical storyline. Mm-hmm. They're not Christians. They're not doing this intentionally. It's like you can't help it. It's just there.
Yeah.
And they do it really intelligently, and I think it really maps over well. So that's probably the most fun, you know, book I've had. I like doing stuff like that. So
yeah. For me, the big takeaway there with Stranger Things was, you know, kind of like that dualism, the idea of being in the upside down and the real world and having access to both.
Yeah.
That to me was like, hey, where have I read this before?
There's a lot of stuff like that, you know, that affirms, you know, I have a whole chapter on, you know, the chapter is called The Veil of Shadows. And I basically just talk about how the upside down mimics Sheol. Mm-hmm. You know, and the problem, of course, for Will is that he's in the underworld, the realm of death, and he can't get out, can't save himself. He's certainly going to die. You know, and you could look at it on the surface level and say, well, he gets out because of the intervention of, you know, his mom and Hopper. And okay, the only way they get there is because of 11.
Right.
Everything about the circumstances that allow them to do what they do is focused entirely on her. It derives from her. Mm. So I mean, there's only a supernatural solution to escaping from Sheol at the end of the day. You know, so it's just things like this that the show, again, nobody's sitting there on the other end, you know, thinking, well, what Christian thing can we throw into this? They're not thinking that at all.
Right.
But it's just so, the connection points are just everywhere if you're paying attention, again, to the supernatural elements of the biblical story. And it's not just the Jesus thing, it's all this other stuff. Like I loved how the show's creators make the hive mind's nature its greatest weakness. In fact, its only weakness. Hmm. You know, because you get into the show a little bit. It's like, oh, come on, you know, how are these bunch of kids and a few adults, you know, and they're all screwed up, they're all damaged in some way. Right. How are they supposed to win here, you know? And they figure out, really not because of brain power, but because of, again, I would say the providential set of circumstances reveals to them that, hey, you know, this thing functions as a hive mind. all of the evil entities are intertwined and connected with each other. But what that means is that its nature and its greatest strength, it's also its weakness, because it can learn, okay? Because like the whole scene with preventing it from knowing where will is and all that stuff. But once it knows something, it knows.
Yeah.
But it cannot anticipate decisions and actions outside the collective. It's not omniscient. And I think that's really a good illustration of how intelligent evil works and is limited. It can only learn and respond and adapt, and it does that extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
But it cannot anticipate. It has to watch. It has to learn. And they use that to their advantage. They split up into different groups, and everybody's doing their own thing, and it all comes together. And it cannot know until it's either allowed to know, and then you have some misdirection there, or until it learns. It's just that it is what it is. So its greatest, strength, this interconnectivity, this hive mind nature, is actually it undermines itself. It leads to its downfall, which I thought was really clever. Now, again, I don't know if they're consciously thinking of that, but that maps over really well to a biblical portrayal of supernatural evil. So
you have to really wonder if they knew.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So it was easy to write the book, and just go through all the episodes and think about what's going on and why and who knows what, who's in the room and who isn't, and all this sort of thing, and just how things come together. The unbelieving world calls that serendipity or chance.
Mm-hmm.
The Christian world says, no, it's providence. There's an intelligence behind it. But it's very easy to map whether you use the language or not. It's there.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun exercise. I think that kind of thing ought to be done. I'm not saying I'm the one to do it, but I think when I came to Celebration, it's a very large, church network. It's 25,000 people, and they have a lot of young people. And I told the leadership, who really liked the Stranger Things book, I said, what we're going to see here, what we need to look for, one of the things we need to look for is we need to find, teenagers and millennials who have a high domain knowledge of my content and have a high domain knowledge of something else, like a video game or the Marvel universe or the DC universe, or manga or anime. I mean, anything like that, because good storytelling will bat. And these are the people who can speak to that audience about this world that they all love, this thing they love, and how it maps over to the biblical story. So we need to find those people, because they'll do it.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah. They're good dot connectors.
Yep, storytellers and dot connectors, they'll do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's something I'd like to see happen.
Well, it's kind of funny you say it, because that does echo across the comics. Even in DC did a story arc a long time ago with Superman, right? Mm-hmm. And how Superman had to battle different forces, including Darkseid and everything else. And he died. Mm-hmm. And then later, his body, because he's an alien species, regenerated, and then he came back, right? So it's interesting. It often does coincide. For your audience, that this is a two-edged sword, because on the one hand, all that stuff's there. Mm-hmm. But the resource I'm thinking of, what you'll also see if you read it, is how once you can sort of see the storytelling of again DC universe and the Marvel universe, it's easy as Christians again to see these kinds of connections. But the flip side of that coin is the Ancient Aliens narrative, because that is a pilfering and a basically they steal the scriptural storyline and pervert it. Yeah. You see that as well. So there's a really good book that gets into this level of the storytelling, and it's called Our Gods Wear Spandex.
Don't let the cover fool you. It's Da Vinci's Last Supper, but it has the superhero characters at the table.
Oh, wow.
And it really goes into how these comic books are really telling high level, archetypal stories.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very readable. It's by Christopher Knowles, I think is the guy's name. But it's actually worth reading if you're into like comic books and stuff like that, or like you interact with young people who read the stuff. They do a lot with that stuff, but there's a good side and a dark side to it too.
That's awesome. I'll check that out. That's really cool. I do like how life mimics art, or the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that is really cool. It kind of leads over into your other book, Demons, right? Going from your underworld over into Demons, because Demons is kind of like an expansion of the previous stuff that you've written.
Yeah.
Is the latest, right? That's the latest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is some intelligent design or semi-intelligent design here. Unseen Realm came out in 2015, and then Supernatural came out with it. That's the light version of Unseen Realm. So from that point, I did the little What Does God Want on my own because I wanted to own the content. But that's for new believers, and then I seed that with things that will help them graduate to Supernatural. And then if they read that, they can graduate to Unseen Realm. Okay. But on the publishing side of the stuff that I don't own all the rights to because it's published through a regular publisher, the decision was made to sort of pick a few topics, items, and drill down into things that were introduced in Unseen Realm, and then expand it as well as we could within a certain amount of pages and at a certain level, that sort of thing. And so that's where Angels came from. It both expands on things that are planted in Unseen Realm and introduces new material, and the Demons book is the same. But the titling is deliberate because Angels is angels, and then the subtitle is what the Bible really says about God's heavenly host.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so that's deliberate because not all the members of God's heavenly host are angels. I mean, so I'm already sort of teasing or tweaking even in the subtitle, because we knew that the word angels would draw attention when people are searching for books, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And of course we also knew that demons would do better because everybody wants the bad guys instead of
right
good guys. But demons is what the Bible really says about the powers of darkness. And again, not all the powers of darkness are demons.
Yeah.
So it tweaks and plays off, this thing that I want people to learn in the book, these sort of fundamental ideas. But, that's what it is. It drills down and it rehashes, retells some things that are in Unseen Realm, but then it adds a lot of material, and fleshes it out. Mm-hmm. Where I couldn't devote the space, in Unseen Realm, because Unseen Realm is just, Genesis to Revelation, this whole framework, building the Matrix, that kind of thing. So this gave us a nice opportunity to camp on areas that we knew people would really be interested in if they'd read either Unseen Realm or Supernatural before.
Yeah, and it does a nice job going through the three stages of the rebellion.
See that, and that's what makes the book unique. I mean, you guys know. I'm serious about it. I often say that the dirty little secret of Unseen Realm is that Mike never had an original thought. I'm just taking scholarship and making it decipherable and connecting dots. That's all I do. It's not like magic. But this book, Demons, is more the same. But this is the one exception. If you were reading in scholarship, again, you would know how Jews sort of looked at why the world is a mess. You ask a Christian that, why is the world such a mess? Where does evil come from? It's the fall. You dummy, don't you read your Bible? It's the fall.
Yeah.
But if you ask the same question to a Second Temple Jew, it's not the answer you would get. The answer you would get is, there's actually three reasons. Fall's the first one. We have to take ownership of that. We're weak and frail and sinful and so on and so forth. But there's a problem, and the problem with Christianity is not to see a supernatural rebellion in Genesis 6, and we've been taught that since the 4th century. I had a guy, I did an interview this week, he had a great line, so I'm going to steal it. And I did an interview with Preston Sprinkle. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a New Testament scholar. But he has a nonprofit now. His thing is theology and gender and homosexuality and like social, how the Bible should intersect with these things. Okay, so and he lives in Utah. So I did a podcast with him this week, and he goes, I read through Demons. He goes, the Genesis 6 stuff. He goes, that's like the John 3:16 of Second Temple Judaism. Everybody agreed on this point. and he's right. It's like of all the things that you get varying opinion on in the Jewish writings, this ain't one of them. Everybody is in lockstep here. Genesis 6 is about supernatural transgression of this boundary between heaven and earth, and how it produces, how it leads to depravity, the proliferation of everybody's on board. There are no dissenting voices. Yeah. And it's that way until you get into the 4th century of the early church, but we're taught to not see that. And then when you get to the 3rd rebellion, we never see that because we read Genesis 1 through 11 about Babel, but we don't see anything in Deuteronomy 32:8 because our translations aren't following the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's like you never get there.
Right.
So we've got one of 3 prongs. And so what makes the Demons book different, it's if there's a unique contribution here, it is the only book, both either in academia or to a popular audience, that addresses spiritual evil from the perspective of 3 rebellions. There is no other book that does that. Again, you have to read the journal literature, this high academic fluff, that kind of stuff to run into that. But nobody has sort of just laid it out in one place on either side. So that's its significant contribution. So I'm hoping readers come away with that. And the other thing I'd want to, and we can talk about it if you want, unless you have a different direction you want to go. But the other thing I would love for them to go away with is the connection between what we think of as spiritual warfare and the Great Commission. I think that's a really big deal that is just totally neglected in discussion. So, those are the 2 takeaways I'm hoping people get with the book.
Well, as a recovering evangelical, I mean, I can definitely relate to the term. I can definitely relate to that. So unpack that a bit. What do you mean?
Sure. Well, if you believe that there's 3 reasons why the world is a mess, and there's these 3 supernatural rebellions, and there's human rebellion mixed in there too. And the proliferation of depravity and all this stuff. This is what you believe. Then you would naturally believe that the Messiah, when he comes, is supposed to fix all 3, not just one. So we've got the Genesis 3 problem, which is the one that Christians only think about. And the problems there are, in the wake of that, of what happens with the supernatural rebel there, we have death as a problem. Everything dies now. There is no more Eden. Everything is anti-Eden. So this is why he later on gets perceived as the God of this world, because sooner or later, everything dies. Everything winds up on his doorstep. He owns everything in that respect. He controls the destiny, or so it would seem, of everything, because everything dies.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem. And then the other problem is, of course, estrangement from God. The relationship between humans, the human family, and God is severed. It's fractured. It's broken.
Yeah.
So those are the Genesis 3 problems. The Genesis 6 problem ultimately really isn't the Nephilim, because they're, the lineage side of that, the giant clans and such, they get eliminated by the time of David. And isn't it a coincidence? Who eliminates the giant clans? Time for Bible trivia. It's Moses and Joshua and David. What do all three of those figures have in common? They're all types of the Messiah. And it's not a coincidence. They are foreshadowings. They are prototypical. You've got the Messiah is the prophet like unto Moses. Okay, but surpassing Moses. He's named Jesus, Yeshua, Joshua, and he's the son of David. Like, oh, what a coincidence. So, that's taken care of that way, but the depravity thing has to be addressed. So how does that get addressed by the work of Jesus? Well, how many times did Jesus say? 4 or 5 times, I would think at least. Jesus tells them, now look, when the Son of Man dies and he's raised after 3 days, I'm gonna leave you guys, and the Spirit is going to come, or I'm going to send the Spirit, in my place. Well, why is that a big deal? Okay, the Holy Spirit doesn't show up here to do what he does unless there's a resurrection. So when Jesus rises from the dead, yes, we've taken care of the death problem now, because you have to take care of the death problem, you have to have a resurrection. And you can't have a resurrection unless you die first. Mm-hmm. So, there's a logic to it. So we take care of that, and believers are joined to Christ. They become members of the body of Christ. And so they're going to rise with him. Okay, we've cured the death problem. If we believe in Jesus, we've cured the estrangement problem. But Jesus has to leave now. And when he leaves, the Spirit's going to come. And what's the Spirit's role? Well, among the Spirit's roles is to indwell believers, to help them to resist sin. In other words, that is the combat, that's the agent of deliverance, or at least combat, resistance to depravity. That's his role. And so that what the Messiah does addresses the Genesis 6 problem of the proliferation of depravity. Then the third, the rebellion at Babel with the nations all fragmented and scattered. This is where I think spiritual warfare really comes in. It comes in with depravity because when we're warned in the New Testament as believers about not giving place to the devil, and watching out, the devil seeks to devour us. And, these are things that relate to the Spirit's ministry, of helping us, not sin and things like that. So there is an element to that there. But what's really, I think, even more dramatic is Jesus, when he ascends and he gives the Great Commission. Okay, just think about some of these data points. The Great Commission is not Matthew 28, 19, and 20. It's Matthew 28, 18 through 20. And we often skip verse 18, where Jesus says, all authority is given unto me in heaven and on earth. Wow, well, like who had the authority before that? The gods of the nation, the principalities, all the princes, Daniel. Well, that's changed, fellas. Because the Most High now, who gave them this authority, has now withdrawn it, because the Most High became a man, that would be me. And, all authority now is vested in me, and I'm going to ascend and go and sit down at the right hand of my Father, where I belong, the rulership position and status. And so I both already rule the nations, but not yet. Your mission is now to go out and find my children among all the nations and bring them all back home. Okay, and this is why Paul, when he talks about the resurrection in half a dozen passages, he connects the resurrection with the nullification of the authority of the principalities and the powers and the rulers and the throne. He just does that. It's axiomatic to Paul. Well, because Jesus did this, they don't have any authority anymore. And this is his message, when he goes into these pagan towns. And in the Demons book, I have a passage from Plato that describes the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Plato's like 600-700 BC. It's the same idea. That the gods are allotted to specific places, and we worship this god because the bigger gods say we have to. It's this whole thinking. Yeah. And so Paul knows this, and he could go into a town and say, look, I get it. I'm here telling you about Jesus, and you're scared because you're thinking, if I listen to this crazy man, this crazy Jew from Tarsus, about Jesus, if I really, buy into this, the gods that we worship here, they're going to be ticked. And we're in trouble. we're going to get harassed. Who knows what's going to happen? They're going to be after us. And so Paul would say, I understand that, and I understand your worldview. I get it. We have the same worldview too, but there's a little difference here, because what you have to realize is that the Most High, who gave the gods their authority as a punishment of the nations back at Babel, became a man, went to a cross for you, died, and rose again. And now he's ascended at the right hand of the Father. He's resumed his kingship. He has authority over all the nations now. He has withdrawn the status that he originally gave. So you're not only free to come back home, but he insists on it. Mm-hmm. So don't be scared. This is the Most High is on your side. So he connects this thought, and then he links his mission. He's the apostle of the Gentiles, so he's the guy that's going to talk in these terms all the time. So he links that the message, his ministry, the gospel, with the fullness of the Gentiles. This is Romans 9 through 11. So whenever God looks at what I'm doing here, my ministries to the Gentiles, whenever we've reached the brim here, whenever the pot's full of Gentiles, whenever God is satisfied, well, at that point, that the fullness of the Gentiles, Israel, my countrymen, will have a reawakening. Okay, all Israel will be saved. Again, whatever that means, it can mean 2 or 3 different things, but that's the catalyst to them coming back and embracing Jesus, and then the end will come. So that the principalities and powers know that when the Great Commission succeeds, they're doomed. That is the point when the judgment of Psalm 82 gets enacted. They're destroyed. They don't just have their authority withdrawn, they are done. They're literally toast. Okay, they cease to exist. They're going to die like then, in the words of Psalm 82. So spiritual warfare is really doing the Great Commission. You just ask yourself, what do the powers fear? Okay, they don't really fear you shouting at them. They don't really fear, playing a gospel song in front of them or something. Okay, that might help, all right? At least it telegraphs whose side you're on, But what they fear is the thing that leads to their destruction. So I often get the question, do the powers of darkness, are they stupid? They really think they can win here. And the answer to that question is, well, it depends how you define victory. Mm-hmm. They're not morons. They know who God is. They know they're not going to beat God. They're not going to kill God, okay? But if you define victory as, hey, the longer we can keep the fullness of the Gentiles from happening, that means we get to stay alive and do what we do.
Yeah.
Think of that. And to be honest with you, they're not doing a bad job.
Right.
They're not doing a bad job. So if you define victory that way, they do think they can win. They think they can kick this can down the road indefinitely. And what's the strategy? Distract Christians from doing it. Yeah. Make Christians, invalidate their testimonies by the way they live. Any number of things that make the church weak or distract the church to put its energies over here instead of here. That's a win. That goes in the W column, okay? Because if the Great Commission isn't happening, good. That's the whole game right there. Yeah. So I'm hoping, that readers will get a sense of that as really being what spiritual warfare is. If Jesus could come back in time and redo the Great Commission, he wouldn't redo it. Okay, like it doesn't need improvement. He doesn't need to tweak it at all. What he actually said was the point. Mm-hmm. He nailed it the first time. Okay, this is what you're supposed to do. And then the end will come.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what I like about this worldview, Mike, is the coherence that it adds to a lot of different denominations, a lot of different theologies, a lot of different interpretations of theologies. For me, as a recovering evangelical, it's a process to get to that point, whereas maybe from a Catholic point of view, it might be easier to read and say, yeah, that makes sense. For me, there was some steps to go through to get to that point, to be able to accept it, not be angry.
Yeah.
Not to say that, everything that I thought was gone, all thrown out. So this adds some level of coherence to an otherwise, for me, a broken theology worldview,
right. It's a, I mean, you guys have you're familiar enough, with me to know that I don't endorse any denomination, and I don't shoot at any either. I've had Catholic friends who are very knowledgeable about the content, and they say the thing that I want to hear, and the thing that I want to hear is not, I'm leaving the Catholic Church. They want to do that, fine. But if you leave that and you go to some other place that isn't preaching the gospel, that's kind of pointless. What I hear from them is, and I've actually had them tell me this. I've had really serious Catholics look at me and say, the Catholic Church needs to be evangelized. Like this has to happen. We have all this truth here, and somehow it, the gospel gets obscured, or there's misdirection. And honestly, that's a story that I think basically every denomination can tell. I had just today, I got, the last assignment for the last written assignment for the class we're doing is basically, give me your testimony. Tell me your story of believing loyalty. It's connected to a believing loyalty lecture. I just read a guy say that up until, I guess he was in his late 20s or 30s, and he had grown up in the church, and it was an evangelical, context. He said, I had never heard a single believer ever talk about repentance or discipleship. No idea what that was, what that was about. I mean, I don't know how you can say that you understand what the gospel is if you exclude those things. How do you get there? What are you telling people?
Right.
But again, this is his story, and it's like, I read something like, I don't know what to say.
That goes back to your earlier point. I definitely agree that the powers of this world have done a pretty good job thus far keeping things confusing, divided. But that's why I appreciate this worldview, is that for me it offers, regardless of denomination or what branch you're under the church, for me it's like a string you could pull on that kind of leads me through all of that, and it grounds me. It can ground you. You know what I mean?
I have really been struck by how meaningful just the concept of believing loyalty is. Because I mean, I'm far enough down this road that it's like what's there to think about here? But for so many, it's like that is like a revolutionary thought.
Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm glad. I mean, I didn't go into the unseen realm. I mean, and since then, Matthew Bates has come out with the book, The Gospel by Allegiance Alone, that has sort of fleshed this out. And, Bates's story is, he went to Notre Dame, but he has a pretty strong relationship with the Catholic community. He's not Catholic, but like part of what he's writing sort of came out of his struggle with the faith and works thing, and then just talking about it in that context. Okay. So, but he's really fleshed it out, but I'm amazed at how revolutionary that is, because really when it gets right down to it is, you're just one sentence. I mean, how difficult can it be to grasp that the gospel is not about merit, your merit in any way? you do works, and your works show what you already believe. They show your loyalty. If you don't have them, then maybe you're not. I mean, how can you validate your claim to believe this thing over here? Mm-hmm. It's not that you're doing this so that God thumbs up, you cross the line. It's I owe you now. It's not that, but so many people are stuck on that. My original context was fundamentalism, and I saw several really, really good people, just sincere. I mean, they're believers, but they were crushed, by the guilt of. It's amazing. They could articulate the gospel verbally very well, but they couldn't get over this hump of really understanding that, even when you fail, it doesn't change God's disposition toward you. While you were yet a sinner, before you even made a profession of faith, he loved you. But now somehow we have to do this checklist of things to keep God happy or to keep him liking us.
Yeah.
It just crushed people. And it wasn't ever really intentional, like on the part of the leadership, but it was just sort of this thing that came across the pulpit, with consistency and the way believers talked about their relationship with the Lord. It was very ducks in a row oriented, and it creates that sort of mindset, thinking, and so just something as simple as, look, the works are not about merit. It's believing loyalty. I mean, again, I'm so far down this road that I don't want to forget, how much I had to, I struggled with that too. But it's one of those things, the light bulb goes on moments that is so helpful.
Yeah.
And lends so much clarity that, but I'm still startled that I can read this guy. I never heard a single Christian, single believer talk about repentance and discipleship. What planet is this guy? But it's where it is. So
well, it's I think you'll appreciate this. So since the last time you were on the podcast, I actually did become Catholic.
Yeah, I know. You sent me an email. You sent me an email about it.
Yeah. And I think what you'll appreciate is that I actually use a lot of because I became the PSR Bible instructor over at the parish, and I use a lot of your material there, and
just what they need.
Yeah, they're highly endorsed. They love it. They love it.
Yeah. Well, the text of Scripture, it's going to sound goofy, but good theology has that effect on people. Like it's gonna be a blessing. If it's good theology, it'll bless them, and they'll respond to it. They'll get clarity on what they need to believe. Like what the gospel is. If that's all the book ever accomplishes, that's pretty good, because again, that is spiritual warfare. At the end of the day, sometimes I have these thoughts where, like, what can I write next that'll just be the biggest pain in the butt, the powers of darkness here, sometimes I have thoughts like that, and honestly, if it's not contributing in some way to a Great Commission operation or advancement, that it's not going to have much of an effect at all.
Yeah.
So I have to keep thinking about that. And I like the Stranger Things book. I like these entry point projects that people who will never read a book about the Bible or theology. They might read the Stranger Things book, and they're getting theology whether they know it or not. That kind of thing appeals to me. Fringe pop is the same way. You never know where people are going to enter the discussion, so you got to give them multiple points of entry. And if they don't look like church, that's fine. It's about theology. It's not about looking like church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it worked really well. They've really been enjoying it, and it's funny because I'll incorporate it with like things that the early church fathers said,
Yep.
and then I'll bring in and show them the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, and it coincides.
Yeah,
It really
and
does.
that's really
There's less
important.
filters with Catholics, though. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't understand. At least with my experience with evangelicals, I mean, we got a lot more filtering.
Yeah, the evangelicals are going to filter out the early church fathers. I mean, in other words, you appealing to them that won't even faze anybody.
Yeah.
But if you can find these bridges, into the fathers, these points of agreement, I think it is really helpful. I get email, not every week, obviously, but I've gotten maybe a few dozen emails from Eastern Orthodox. Too. And they have Psalm 82 in their liturgy in some places.
Oh yeah.
It's really because of the theosis emphasis. It's not so much the gods under judgment, even though that it's in there. But I mean, like, I couldn't find that in evangelical.
Yeah.
So there are things like that if you can use the tradition as a bridge to people in those denominations, that might just be the thing they need to validate it in their heads, and then they can start to trust you, when you give them scripture. It's important.
Yeah.
And it's great to have those bridges like say a Justin Martyr who directly said that the Titans were the fallen angels, right?
Yeah. Irenaeus, Justin Martyr. I mean, I mean, it's encouraging that. And I don't want to beat up on Augustine here, but it's like, why can't we pay more attention to some of those guys as opposed to like why? And I know historically, why Augustine sort of rose to prominence. There were historical circumstances to that, but still, it doesn't seem right to ignore the thinking of people who just aren't as well known, but who are just as smart, just as astute, as he was.
Yeah. I think you're having an impact because. So I was looking at the footnotes at the USCCB, the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops.
Mm-hmm.
They've revised a few things on their rendition, the NABRE. Mm-hmm. So like here's their footnote on Psalm 82.
What year is this?
This is currently on the website right now.
Okay.
So on Psalm 82 it says the pagan gods are seen as subordinate divine beings to whom Israel's God had delegated oversight of the foreign countries in the beginning. Now God arises in the heavenly assembly to rebuke the unjust gods who are stripped divine status and reduced to mortal ranks. So it's this kind of stuff is coming through.
And do you know when that was revised? Like, do you have a guesstimate?
I believe it was in around 2002, 98, right in there somewhere.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. Yeah.
So
I mean that's admirable because evangelicalism obviously, and Protestantism generally, they are fond of saying things like we have no teaching magisterium, but they sort of behave as if they do.
Right.
There's like a resistance, and it can be something as simple and probably unvoiced, but as simple as, well, Calvin didn't write about that in the Institutes, or Luther didn't say that, I mean, they won't put it that way, but that's kind of where they're at,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. In fact, you'd appreciate this one too, because in Genesis 6, it even says that these enigmatic verses are a transition between the expansion of the human race illustrated in the genealogy of chapter 5 and the flood depiction in chapter 6. The text, apparently alluding to the old legend, shares a common ancient view that the heavenly world was populated by a multitude of beings, some of whom were wicked and rebellious, it is incorporated here not only in order to account for the prehistoric giants, whom the Israelites called the Nephilim, but also to introduce the story of the flood with a moral orientation. So they actually include it as giants, and they do go through and say it's divine beings, not the Sethite.
I'd be happy at the very least if they just didn't say there's nothing to see here, go away.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so they're changing their views, and I think it's because of great scholars around like yourself.
Well, I would hope that they're reading, scholarship, and it's having an impact. Being, to that. There's honestly a lot of Second Temple scholarship. I mean, I think it's just the last 15 or 20 years. I think you've really seen an upsurge, even in how commentaries are getting written. There's a lot more interaction with the material. I don't know if you listen. I don't think it's even aired, but the podcast episode we did we recorded a week ago tomorrow, so last Friday. We did an episode on binding and loosing.
Oh.
And it doesn't have anything to do with church, like ecclesiastical authority. And you guys are gonna be shocked here, and I think a lot of people are going to be shocked, because this is, and I actually say this in the episode, this is going to be Exhibit A of why we should not read the New Testament filtered through the rabbinic material, which is later, but we should read it through Second Temple material. And I mean, I give a few examples of commentaries and things where basically they're saying, well, the rabbis say this, the rabbis say that, and all this, and like nobody even searches. They don't even do searches of the terms binding and loosing within the New Testament and in the Greek literature of the Second Temple period. Because if you do that, it's about power over demons. It's about exorcism.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with like these other historical discussions that we talk about. And it's like, look, if you'd have just looked, it would have like taken your head in a totally different direction. But it's just kind of shocking that out of the gate, people just, well, what do the rabbis say? And then, the dirty little secret of commentaries is that a lot of commentaries just repeat what earlier commentaries said. That's just what they're doing. But you're going to find it a little startling, like, because it'll seem so obvious what this is, and then it'll hit you like, why didn't they just look this up? Why didn't they just run the search? But they don't. It's they're doing all this rabbinical stuff, But I think it's changing. I think the Second Temple is having a lot more of a contribution, to scholarship.
Yeah.
And I just looked at the clock, and it's 6:03 because I have a 6:15 appointment.
Okay.
So if I know you can cut this or whatever, but if you have a last question, you should ask it.
I do have one more question. Have you watched Star Trek Picard yet?
I have not. Go ahead.
I think you should. I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay. Can you give me another? Or you don't want to give me a hint as to why, or?
It let's just say that it wraps up a lot of things from both Voyager and Next Generation, and it leads into a whole new thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think you'll really enjoy it.
They don't do the time travel thing, do they?
Not as much. No, there's some
not as much.
Yeah, there's some flashbacks.
But I mean like the newest iteration of the movies. And I usually hate time travel. Like I'm with Captain Janeway. When I was at the academy, I swore I would never do the time travel. So I'm kind of with her. But the movies, I thought, did it, pretty well. But the characters are intact, but then you have these new, trajectories. So, but they don't do anything like that, do they?
No, they do a little bit in Discovery. And Discovery was okay, but Picard I think you'll really enjoy because it picks up some of the storylines from both Voyager and from Next Generation and from the Next Generation movies, and it moves them into a whole new area that was just coming into play across the movies.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I will take that as a positive endorsement.
right.
A little poke, to get me to watch that. Okay. All right. Sounds worthy.
Thank you so much for coming on.
We do appreciate it, Michael.
Yeah, really enjoy every time we have you on, and we'll dive further into something the next time we can goad you into coming back on again because there's so much more to talk about.
Just let me know. Let me know.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Thanks. Have a great night.
You too.
All right. Don't forget to visit us on Patreon, virtually all social media, and podcast platforms. Have a great night.
Hey, there's nothing taboo over brew.